Hello everyone, and thank you for your patience. We are still wrapping up the second day of our 11th Council meeting, and so things aren't always in our hands. If the members want to speak, they will speak. So that's what we are facing right now. On behalf of the International Renewable Energy Agency, I'd like to thank you and welcome you all to this call announcing the launch of the Renewable Energy and Jobs Annual Review 2016. It's great to have you all here today, and it's great to see such a wide variety of people joining us. My name is Tim Hurst, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined right now by Rabia Ferroukhi, who is the Deputy Director for Knowledge Policy and Finance and the head of our policy unit. We'll also be joined by Mr. Adnan Amin, the Director General of IRENA, when he is done at the Council session. So just minutes ago here in Abu Dhabi, we concluded, or we are in the process of concluding the 11th Council meeting, attended by over 300 officials representing 96 countries. Excuse me. Among the items on the agenda of the three-day meeting was the presentation and our discussion of our work on socioeconomics of renewable energy. In particular, the annual Renewable Energy and Jobs Report, the only global assessment of renewable energy employment. So we'll begin with a presentation by Dr. Rabia Ferroukhi, and after that, hopefully we'll be joined by Mr. Amin to give some remarks as well. Rabia?
Thank you very much, Tim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce some of IRENA's latest work on renewable energy employment. In a world slowly recovering from economic crisis, policymakers continue to explore ways to stimulate social and economic growth, and obviously jobs is very important. This is why we need to better understand what the energy transition towards renewable energy means in terms of employment in the energy sector. But as you may know, specific analytical work and empirical evidence on this important subject continues to be relatively limited. So we at IRENA have started work on employment in renewable energy in 2011. We have accumulated a wealth of knowledge that has filled some of the gap in the literature. Noteworthy is our in-depth analysis into the various dimensions of jobs in our report Renewable Energy and Jobs in 2013, as well as our annual review of employment in the sector, which has become a reference point for policymakers and analysts in the sector. Last year, our analysis found that nearly 7.7 million jobs existed in the renewable energy sector. The much awaited number for this year is that renewable energy employment has now grown to 8.1 million people worldwide. Now, compared to the 7.7, this is a 5% increase, which indicates that the sector continues to create jobs. And it's interesting because this is in an environment where the larger energy sector has struggled to retain jobs. In the US, for example, renewable energy jobs increased by 6%, while employment in oil and gas decreased by 18%. Now, if we look at the country-level data, China, Brazil, and the US dominate the renewable energy job market in 2015. China led employment creation with 3.5 million jobs, but an interesting trend is the marginal increase in jobs despite record growth in solar PV and wind deployment capacity in 2015. This is due to continued mechanization in manufacturing, market consolidation, and also the use of equipment stocks from last year. In Brazil, which is the second largest employer, most jobs are in biofuel, but employment in the wind energy sector is increasing substantially. Again here, we think that the use of auction and financing rules to encourage local content have supported wind developments. In the US, jobs in the sector have increased by 6%, as I just mentioned. Again, attractive policies were fundamental, including the federal investment tax credits, state-level net metering, renewable portfolio standard, which have supported a 20% increase in solar employment, for example. Now, noteworthy in the developments at the country or regional level is the fact that there is a shift towards Asian countries through the due to the strong renewable energy deployment policies and competitive wind and solar PV manufacturing facilities. So Japan, for example, has been a world leader in solar PV deployment in the past couple of years because of its attractive feed-in tariffs, and employment increased substantially as a result, about 28%. Now, the Indian solar and wind markets have also seen significant activity, and as the policy actions to support the announced targets come into force, more and more domestic jobs are likely to be created. So the 100 gigawatt target for solar PV, for example, it is estimated that it could result in about 1.1 million jobs. Another noteworthy estimate that I'd like to highlight this year is that of Africa, which we have for the first time. As you can imagine, there are great difficulties in gathering data in general for jobs in renewables, but specifically in certain regions. Africa is one of them. So the lack of data and also on, in general, but also on access, in the context of access, means that our estimate is quite conservative. We have 61,000 jobs. The countries that stand out are Egypt, Morocco, and Kenya, and South Africa is the largest employer. Now, looking at the employment by technology, I'll be very brief in highlighting a few points, which is the fact that solar PV continues to grow as the largest employer within the renewable energy sector with 2.8 million people. That's 11% increase. The strong wind installation rates in China, the US, and Germany resulted in a 5% increase in global employment in the wind industry to 1.1 million jobs. And finally, biofuel employment declined by 6%, and that's due partly to mechanization in some countries and to low biofuel production in others. Again, continuing on the focus on technology, very briefly, as you know, IRENA carries out its own employment factor-based estimate. There is no such global estimate on large hydro anywhere else. China is the lead employer again, followed by Brazil and India. But an interesting trend is that the rapid decline, about 40% in new large hydro installation last year, resulted in a job decrease by 13%. So we're at 1.3 million this year. And as a result of the declining new installation, we have the construction and installation job segment that has declined, and most of the jobs are obviously now in the other segments, in particular operation and maintenance segment of the value chain. And now this analysis of the relative share of employment on the basis of the different segments of the value chain really provides very interesting insight. And the numbers of jobs created in different segments varies, of course, by technology, but also by country. So very briefly, if you see what is happening in the solar PV, for example, we see very different relative shares, like China has a predominance of its job created in manufacturing, about almost 80%, and the rest is installation. And in the US, it's the reverse, manufacturing being the smaller share and installation the larger one. Now, I'm very happy that this year we're able to give two thematic focuses. One is employment in off-grid applications, where we look at standalone solar PV, like solar home systems, and how they create jobs in countries like Bangladesh, India, Kenya, etc. And also at cooking and motive power, with a significant number of jobs in certain areas. This focus draws from a lot of other work that we do on the topic in IRENA. The second focus, which I'm very proud to introduce, is that on gender. As you know, gender disaggregated data in the renewable energy sector is quite scarce. So what we did this year is conducted an online survey among private companies that work in the sector, and we were quite impressed by the nearly 90 companies that answered from about 40 countries. And the results show, as we have some interesting insights, women represent an average of 35% of the workforce in those companies. This is a significant finding, considering that women only account for about 20 to 25% of the workforce in the overall energy industry. The sector may also be conducive to offering leadership and managerial roles to women more so than other sectors, and women in the surveyed company represent 32% of management roles compared to 25% of senior level management positions held in Fortune 500 companies in 2015, for example. Now, the entry of more women into the renewable energy job market will provide a wider pool of skills needed for a really fast-growing renewable energy sector, because according to our estimates, as the ongoing energy transition accelerates, growth in renewable energy employment will remain strong. So, for example, doubling the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix by 2030 could result in more than 24 million jobs worldwide in 2030. As I tried to highlight in the different examples in this presentation, the enabling framework is fundamental, not only in terms of deployment policies themselves, but also supporting policies with an optimal mix adapted to local conditions that will depend on the stage of renewable energy developments, industrial development, economic development objectives, the general business environment, etc. I hope that you will enjoy reading this year's edition of our publication. There's a lot more I could tell you, but I prefer to leave the floor to your questions and hopefully go into the different directions that you're more interested in. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Rabia. We have a number of questions coming in, so I just wanted to flag first, if you do have a question, you can go ahead and signal to us in the question tab, and we will unmute you so you can ask it, or if you'd prefer, you can just enter and type your question into the question bar if you'd rather. So let me start going through some of these questions first. The first question is actually from an anonymous. Can you explain why large hydro is not included in the 8.1 figure?
Yes, thank you, Tim. So we took the decision not to group these numbers together for a specific reason, which is the fact that large hydro year on year has very, very big fluctuations in investments. So this is why I highlighted before when I spoke about that technology and the fact that the number of jobs decreased. So because of very high fluctuation year on year, it doesn't give necessarily the right picture for the overall industry. So that's why we have them there, and it's our own estimates, but we can keep them separate for that purpose. You will also notice, for example, that BNF investment numbers also exclude large hydro for the very same reason. And as a result, it would also give the trends would be very difficult to analyze because of that specific fluctuation in large hydro.
Okay, thank you, Rabia. We have two questions from Gulsen Kagate. Pardon me if I didn't get your name right. His first question is, what is the total increase in the EU? And the second question was, do we have any data on how many women are working in fossil fuel? I can answer the second part of that question, which is that we don't actually have that data. The data that we have on fossil fuel employment comes from other sources, so that was actually just to inform and provide context to our data. And I will let Rabia answer the first question on the total increase in the EU.
Thank you very much. So actually the EU is a decrease, and that's the fourth year in a row where we see a decrease in employment in renewable energy employment. It's a decrease of 3% last year. That is equivalent to about 32,000 people, so the number is now in the EU down to 1.17 million people. Solar PV has taken the greatest hit, but we do see a rebound in the wind industry with employment increasing thanks to some of the projects that are coming online in a few countries, in particular, for example, the offshore wind industry in the UK, Germany, and Denmark.
Okay, the next question is from Judith Lavoie. Any figures for Canada, and if not, why not?
Sorry?
Any figures for?
Yeah, so Canada, we have a few numbers. We have a total of 36,000 people working in the industry, 10,000 of which are in wind and 8,000 in PV. The rest mostly is in biofuels.
The next question we have is from Roy Hales. Roy asks, though the EU's decline in the number of energy-related jobs is far stronger in the conventional sector, it also extends to renewables. Can you comment further on this?
If Thank you for the question. Regarding renewable energy, employment in the European solar PV industry is just 1/3 of what it was in 2011. And that's largely due to a reduction in manufacturing. As you know, we have had a shift of manufacturing towards Asian countries, which I mentioned in the presentation. Interestingly enough, the UK has become the continent's largest PV installation market and the second largest employer with 35,000 people. But again, just like what we expect in other countries with the cuts in feed-in tariffs for certain segments of the solar market, we might see some losses in jobs in this year. Now the decline in the fossil fuel industry I cannot answer. We have not looked at the EU specifically in terms of the decline in numbers.
Okay, thank you, Rabia. Next question I have is about maybe data missing in some countries. The question is will IRENA be part of doing more data gathering in the future, in the coming years, and including in growing markets like Turkey?
Yes. So it's very interesting because there are a number of countries send us requests to get data for their own country, and it's very difficult to estimate the number of countries at the domestic level for the specific country, simply because we would have to go through the capacity figures. Data is not gathered in most of these countries, and generally labor data is difficult to gather, and in renewable energy is specifically difficult because it cuts across a lot of sectors. So for Turkey we have started and we have a few numbers, but we don't feel comfortable enough yet to release those numbers until we have done some more work with the stakeholders in the country.
Okay, thank you, Rabia. The next question is a political hot button, and we won't have as much detail on it as I think you are hoping, but we will give you what we have. The question is, how might a UK exit from the EU affect jobs in renewables? And has this been considered in the 24 million jobs by 2030 prediction? I can answer the second part of your question, and that no. The 24 million figure has not been considered into looking at whether or not the UK would stay in the EU or not. But Dr. Rabia can actually give you some figures and some insight into renewables employment in the UK?
Thank you, Tim. So as I earlier mentioned, employment in the UK is globally increasing. Again, it is specifically increasing in the PV market, and that's, as I said, the UK has become the continent's largest PV installation market. It's 2.6 gigawatt in 2014, and it's the second largest employer, 35,000 people. Wind has been relatively stable, and overall we see a slight increase in numbers.
Okay. The next question I have has to do with the rate of growth this year versus last year. The 5% increase in jobs last year is well down from the 18% increase we saw last year. What is the main reason for this? And has IRENA revised its forecast for future job growth down as a result?
Thank you very much. So the reason why the growth, so the absolute numbers have increased, but the growth is not as fast as it was before last year. And the reason for that is that we have a consolidation in the market. We have a greater mechanization of certain segments of the value chain, in particular manufacturing. And also what happened in particular in solar PV is that we have used some of the stocks from last year. Whether we will revise our numbers for 2030, no, because the way we calculate 2030 is through the capacity that exists in 2030 of renewable energy. In other words, we have calculated what the number of jobs would be in 2030 if we double the share of renewables. So that gives us an equivalent in terms of the capacity that we would have of renewables at that in 2030, with a certain breakdown in technologies in terms of the cost of the technologies that are forecasted until then, and that's how we come to the number. So we still expect that the transition will move us by 2030 to a doubling of the share of renewables, and therefore to the equivalent, to the same number of jobs, 24 million, that we have mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you, Rabia. We have still some more questions coming in. I will take probably 3 more questions. So can you explain why women seem to gravitate to renewable energy, the renewable energy sector, over conventional energy industries?
So the answer is very simple. In terms of the survey we carried out is modern sector renewable energy jobs, and we believe, or there is evidence that women seem to be more attractive to fields that are related to sustainability issues. So that's the modern sector, and that's where we have some findings now that we carried out ourselves. But in the rural context, we also know that women, being the decision makers in terms of energy and the way in gathering fuel and cooking, etc., and heating, are the ones who make the decision, and they're really at the center of decision making. Oh, okay. So that's it.
Okay. So the next question I have is another sort of hot button topic, and we heard this question a lot last year, particularly in terms of how low oil prices are affecting renewable energy growth. We saw last year that it really had no effect in terms of capacity additions or investment. Both were sort of record years. So the next question is, what was the effect of low oil prices on job growth in renewables?
So in terms of low oil prices, renewable energy in terms of electricity generation does not compete with oil. So as a result of that, the effect was quite small. There's been some effect this year in terms of biofuels because, and I have mentioned earlier, a slight decrease in job creation in biofuels. that could be related to in liquid biofuels to the competition with in transportation. But overall, we have seen little competition with oil. I should also mention that the main reason why we have seen a decrease in biofuel jobs is the mechanization that has happened in certain countries.
Okay, we have one last question here, and this is it was already sort of alluded to once, but we just want to sort of reiterate, and that is what is your future prediction on job growth?
Okay, so as I said, we have this estimation for 2030 that is over 24 million people, but we should be also we should look realistically at trends in general in job, which is another reason why growth hasn't been as strong, and will probably not be as strong as it has been the first 2 years, where we were looking at this as these trends, which is simply the fact that as an industry matures, this is what is happening in the solar industry, for example, you will see that labor productivity increases, and as a result of that, you have less jobs that are created. So there are different factors that will play into the growth of jobs, but we believe that what is extremely important in order to prepare the growth of jobs and the growth of the industry in the years to come is to look at two aspects. One is enabling policies. As I mentioned earlier, you have the deployment policies that we all talk about all the time, but there are a lot of other supporting policies that can create the right environment to maximize the benefit from renewable energy deployment. So that's one. And the second one is to be ready by developing the appropriate skills and education and training required for the jobs to come in this particular segment of the industry.
Okay, very good. So that will be all we have today. Unfortunately, the Director General will not be joining us, as he is still giving his closing remarks, and the members had more to say this evening than we thought they might, so that's usually a good thing. But he does send his regrets. If you have any further follow-up questions for Dr. Rabia or for us, please do not hesitate to get in touch. And again, we thank you for taking time to join us on this call today. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.